Hello, welcome along to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name's James Copley. Today I'm joined by Sheffield United writer Danny Hall from the Star. We're going to be previewing the big game at Wembley on Saturday. Danny, how are you feeling about it all?
Yeah, not bad at the minute, to be fair, which is quite a strange position to be in for a Sheffield United of a Sheffield United persuasion with our record in the past playoff finals. But yeah, quite looking forward to it at this stage. Whether that changes as the game gets closer, I'm sure it will. The nerves will start to kick in. But at the minute, almost a sense of almost excitement at what might happen and what might be to come. So yeah, feeling good at the minute.
You've mentioned something there that I was going to touch on later in the podcast, but we'll come straight to it. For those Sunderland fans that are looking for some hope, for some superstitions, Sheffield United's record at Wembley is really, really, really poor. Talk us through that, because until quite recently, Sunderland had a very poor record at Wembley after the famous cup victory against Leeds United in 1973. That monkey is now off Sunderland's back, but it's still well and truly on Sheffield United's back. In the grand scheme of things, I suspect these things don't actually mean that much to the players, but in terms of fan psychology, it's really important.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention there, James, in terms of I did a piece a few weeks back. United lost playoff finals in 97, 2003, 2009, 2011. You could sort of spend the whole podcast going over the real failures in this competition. But, I did a piece. City Peck, who will play in this one, probably was about 3 weeks old in 97. Gus Harmer, who obviously will play in this one, was about 10 months old when they lost to Palace in 97. These things don't matter to these players. It's a different thing with the fans. I think they've been scarred a few times. Their record at Wembley, they've not won a Wembley in 100 years, exactly 100 years. So maybe if you're looking for a bit of an omen, perhaps that is one. Ultimately, these things, like you said, don't count for much, do they? It could be a case where United are going to Wembley having won all 10 of their previous attempts, and ultimately that wouldn't mean anything either. It doesn't mean that they're guaranteed to win this time because they've lost, all nine of their playoff campaigns, since 1988. Doesn't mean this one is doomed to failure either. It's just something that was in the media sort of like to highlight, don't we, and sort of cling to, because it is a remarkable record. The fact that they haven't not just not won a playoff final. I can't remember them really turning up in one, to be fair. For a while, there've been some really poor afternoons at Wembley. Some really, really disappointing ones. And it's no place to lose, is it? It must be a brilliant place to win. It'd be nice to know that, but it's no place to lose. When you go down there, trips, 30,000 fans down to Wembley, you just want your team to show up. And to be fair, last time we were there a couple of years ago against Manchester City in the semi-final, they had a go. Obviously City are a different beast, aren't they? And they won 3-0, and quite rightly so. But they had a go, and I think that is all United fans. I think Sunderland fans, from what I can sense, are pretty similar in that's what they want from their team. They want a team that rocks up and they have a go. And if they're not good enough on the day, if the other team are better, if they say yes, as Chris Wilder likes to say, if they have a good day out and are better on the day, I think the majority of United fans will sort of accept that. But if they see their team not turning up, not giving everything, that's when they have issues. And to be fair, we had a few days like that last season, perhaps in the Premier League. But to be fair, excuse me, that's one thing this season that's not happened. Whatever has happened, they've lost games, they've lost to Leeds, they've lost to Burnley. They lost 3 games in a pretty big week. That ultimately cost them automatic promotion. But there's not been many times, if any times, where you've sat there and gone, they've not given everything this afternoon. And that's, something that Chris Wilder demands. That's not something that he accepts praise for. He just thinks that is part of being a professional footballer. And he's right in that. But I think, if United fans can see their team giving everything, then they'll be pretty, content with that. And hopefully they can do that and then marry that up with the sort of on the ball side of things, a bit of magic maybe on Saturday, because I think it'll be a incredibly tight, cagey game between the two teams. Hopefully they can find those big moments and hopefully, get the job done.
How's the season felt for you obviously coming down from the Premier League last campaign, it's been, from an outsider's perspective, a really good season for Sheffield United. Perhaps a little bit disappointing to miss out on the top two, but there's an understanding there that the two top teams managed 100 points, and Sheffield United's 90 would get you up more often than not in the Championship. Also, from an outsider's perspective, it feels like while Sheffield United have had a really good season, what you described there in terms of being really robust at the back, trying really hard, really disciplined and well structured under Chris Wilder, is it fair to say that perhaps in an attack and free flowing sense that they haven't lived up to expectations? That's certainly the feeling I've got from watching Sheffield United, albeit I haven't watched every single game, I must admit.
Yeah, I sort of get the sense in that if you're comparing them, to Leeds, who are obviously on a different planet and they've got free scoring players and battering teams 7-0, more often than you probably expect teams to do, then perhaps so. But I think Sheffield United have always been this as well when they've been at their best. It's like a, the sum of the parts sort of thing rather than a free scoring, 30 goal a season sort of striker. They spread the goals around and they've just been sort of ruthless when they've had to be, if that makes sense. They haven't, like I said, really put teams to bed until the semi-final against Bristol City when they're obviously on a different planet, really, to Bristol City. And that's no disrespect to them. United just far too good over two legs. But there hasn't been that really sort of dominant 90 minutes, 4, 5, 6-0 performance that we've seen from other teams. It's been more of a sort of, like you said, build from the back, especially early in the season when they had Harry Souttar and their clean sheet record was brilliant. They kept so many clean sheets on the bounce. I think it challenged the club record at one point. So it's been a more sort of pragmatic approach for a lot of the season, I think. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You play to your strengths, don't you? They've had the top scorer, I think, is Tyrese Campbell, who scored 10. So it's not been a 20, 25, 30 goal a season campaign from him. But others have chipped in. We will talk about Gus Harmer. I'm sure it was an absolute joke of a player at this level. Officially the best player in the division after winning that Player of the Year award, which got a few tongues wagging just up the M1 here at Leeds. But yeah, after the season on a whole has been quite refreshing, I think, after last season. Last season was a real struggle, as you can probably imagine from the outside. But they were miles off it. Absolutely miles off it in the Premier League. They were miles off it at the start. They went in completely undercooked. They were playing under 21s players and new signings, in the second game of the season against Man City. And it was just, they were so far off it. So I think Chris Wilder spoke about this yesterday in his press conference. It was almost a bit of a relief in the summer to be able to change it up so much. They let, double easily almost 24 players leave in the summer, loanees, players who were at the end of their time here, players who were sold on to bring in new faces. The turnover was huge, and people look at the job United have done this season and they go, oh, it's because of parachute payments and it's because you're a Premier League club and you should be there. And I think it's a little bit lazy in many ways because they didn't spend the way to get to where they are. They have good players. There's no point arguing that. That money probably did allow Callum O'Hare to come in the summer. It allowed you to keep hold of Gus Harmer. But I always go back to signing Michael Cooper and Harrison Burrows, who were two of the best signings in the league for me, obviously from my biased position here in Sheffield, but two of the best signings in the league in the summer. And they came from Plymouth and Peterborough, and no disrespect to those clubs, but United had to raise money from sales to buy those two from Plymouth and Peterborough. So the idea that they've sort of bought the league, or bought promotion, or bought a promotion attempt this season always makes me smile. But yeah, it's been a big sort of rebuild. I think that sort of goes under the radar a little bit in terms of the way they've changed the style, changed the way they play, they've changed the approach. They've been associated with a 3-5-2 for such a long time under Chris Wilder, and he's sort of changed that in the summer to play with wingers and, Gus Harmer playing the free roll off the left. And it's been quite refreshing. I think he's been refreshed by all that. The fans have been refreshed by that after what happened last season. And there is a little bit of and I stress that's an if United do go back to the Premier League this season, I think there's a little bit of scepticism amongst the fan base as to what will happen, understandably, after what happened last season. But, as I would make the point, this is a new group, there's a new ownership in place. and Chris Wilder's as enthused as ever about making a success of his job at Sheffield United. So yeah, it's been a refreshing sort of season. It's been interesting to watch, and hopefully, they can sort of finally put that long Wembley curse to bed this weekend and get back to the Premier League, and then the fun really does start.
I was talking, Danny, to a friend this morning, Ken, out in Sunderland walking our dogs, and I think we were having a little bit of a therapy session and trying to convince ourselves of reasons Sunderland are going to turn up and do it at Wembley. But we were talking about the semi-final and the difference in semi-finals between Sunderland and Sheffield United. I likened Sunderland's 2 legs against Coventry City to a 12-rounder in boxing, a really hard physical 12-rounder. And in boxing terms, that sort of gets you ready, doesn't it, for the next physical big clash?
Yeah.
My argument was that perhaps Sheffield United versus Bristol, because of that red card in the first leg, was a bit of a knockout blow, really, wasn't it? And then Bristol City in the second leg had to come out, and they had to sort of try and score that first goal, and Sheffield United just picked them off. Am I right in thinking that there's something in that, or am I clutching at straws? Because my argument was that in terms of being ready for sort of that big match feeling at Wembley and like a little bit of a defensive slog, Sunderland were arguably better suited in terms of the playoffs.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? What we all cling to, because the talk down here is sort of, how much energy of Sunderland exerted in those 2 legs, whereas
it's a very
United
valid point.
I'm not saying they took it easy or anything like that, but they did, rest some players when you're 6-0 up, with half an hour to go, whatever it was in the second leg. How much emotional energy did that take out of Sunderland? We'll never know, will we, until the day. It's one of those things that we can sort of cling to things, or we can the opposite. We can look at it and go, oh, maybe this is, almost convince yourself why you're going to fail this time, which I think is happening down here. What I will say is that, some scenes up there, by the way, weren't there? And obviously you'll have been there for that second leg when Ballard stuck that goal in. Geez, unbelievable scenes. And what a way to set yourself up for a final. It was a lot more sort of straightforward and serene for United, wasn't it? Sort of breezing through almost. I don't mean any disrespect to Bristol City by that, but when you're 3-0 up after the first leg away, the job is sort of done, isn't it? And they were professional enough. What sort of pleased me was more how they, not the 6 goals really across the 2 legs. I think it was at 5-0 up on aggregate, and there was a chance where Bristol City broke from a corner, and before, I can't remember, the Bristol City might have been Naki Wells, before he got a touch on the left wing, all 11 United, or all 10 outfield players were back in their own half to defend it, and that was at 5-0 up, where you could think, oh, you know what, we're in the final now, we'll put our feet up, we'll conserve some energy. And that really sort of impressed me. It was a little unseen moment into the mentality of this side. It's not been about battering teams, you'll score 5, we'll score 6. It hasn't been about that. It's been ruthlessly sort of just overpowering teams almost. We've seen that so many times this season. But yeah, the 2 legs against Coventry I thought were really interesting. They'll be ruin, their chances that they had. There's a big chance at the end when, if they should have stuck it away, and they should probably, I could have been talking to a Coventry, podcaster at this time, but, football's about big moments, isn't it? He stuck that header miles wide. I think it was Haji Wright. And then when it mattered, Dan Ballard somehow, I've seen a picture of him sort of from the side where he's heading the ball, and it doesn't look anything like he should be able to head the ball in top corner from that position. He's done unbelievably well.
I'm interested, actually. I'm interested, Danny, in your perspective, actually, of Sunderland versus Coventry over the 2 legs, because we've been a little bit surprised, really, by some of the narratives, more from the Coventry end, that Coventry sort of passed and played Sunderland off the park. We didn't really get that impression. We thought it was a resolute defensive display. They gave up a lot of the ball, particularly in the first leg. Coventry City went long. It didn't really work for them. Ballard had a stormer. I think there's an argument to say that Coventry was certainly better in the second leg, and Sunderland's mentality, maybe they were a bit nervous, cagey, but it never really felt to me like Coventry are playing Sunderland off the park. I felt like that against Leeds United at Ellen Road in the second half when they scored 2 late goals. I felt like Leeds were playing Sunderland off the park at times. I felt like that against Leeds at the Stadium of Light, again, at times in little 20-minute periods. But I never really felt like that against Coventry, with the caveat of, yeah, they had the ball and they did have a few gilt-edged chances, but it didn't feel to me like a footballer masterclass.
Yeah, agree. It just seemed to me, obviously from my vantage point down here in Sheffield, like a bit of just a typical playoff game. Really, it was a bit cagey at times, wasn't it? Like you said, they gave up the ball a lot. They had a lot of sort of territory without really doing a great deal with it. And I think football just comes down to big moments, doesn't it? I go back to the headers. Sorry, where one really should be on target and is miles wide, and then when Ballard gets the chance in a big moment, he sticks it away. So yeah, the narrative, like I said before, the narrative could be, we've dug out a real defensive, dogged display that's good for character. It could be, perhaps we weren't as offensively dangerous as Sheffield United perhaps looked by winning 6-0, and the reverse sort of could be true as well, couldn't it? It's just the whole narrative thing ultimately counts for very little, doesn't it? It's about what happens on the day, what happened against Bristol City. Doesn't matter now. We spoke yesterday with Chris about the difference in the table. I think United finished 16 points clear of Sunderland in the table, but at 3 o'clock or 3 or 1 p.m. when it kicks off on Saturday, doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't count for anything. They can take a bit of confidence from that. They'll take a bit of belief in that. The table shows that they are. I don't think it's too controversial to say they were a better team than Sunderland over the course of the season, as Leeds and Burnley were a better team than Sheffield United, as Sunderland were a better team than Coventry and Bristol City. That's how the league table works. It shows who was the better team over 46 games, doesn't it? But in the playoffs, it's a terrible cliche that we're straying into here, but it doesn't really count for anything because it's a one-off game. It's 90 minutes, hopefully. Hopefully it's not 120 and penalties, because I don't know if I'll be able to take that. It's winner takes all, isn't it? What's happened on the first day of the season against Preston, what happened on Boxing Day against Burnley, what happened, against Leeds and whatever, it doesn't ultimately count for anything now. Maybe you can take a bit of belief from the fact that you finished, comfortably clear of Sunderland. That will maybe make a little psychological impact, but doesn't give you any more goals, does it? At kick-off, it starts 0-0. It's it's a clean slate almost, and winner takes all. Who's the best team on the day? Who handles the pressure the best as well? I think the mentality will be huge. Who handles the occasion better? Sunderland, from my perspective, quite a young. I know they've got some experienced players, Roberts and Ballard and those types of players, but it seems quite a youthful team, which can be, again, you can spin that either way you like. You can say that youthful sort of ignorance almost in a good way. You can say, are they going to be overawed by the occasion? United have a bit more experience. It's still quite a youthful team, but there's a lot of players there who've played at Wembley before, and not only played at Wembley, they've succeeded there. Harrison Burrows scored a couple in only a JPT win or whatever it's called now, but there would have been 80,000. There'd been a big crowd there from what I remember, and that would have been a big day for him. He scored a couple, and they won the trophy. Rob Holdings won the FA Cup there. Hamza Chowdhury won the FA Cup there. Gus Harmer and Callum O'Hare have both scored there. So there's a lot of sort of experience to fall back on there, not just of going to Wembley and seeing what it's like in the day and all the bright lights and the big crowd and what it's like, that emotional energy. There's players there who have actually been there and done well and succeeded. So that could be a little, I don't know, just a little bonus perhaps. Like I say, you can spin these things both ways, because if you've been there for the first time, it could be new to you and it could be fresh and it could inspire you a little bit more. Ultimately, we'll only know on the day.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right to mention that Sunderland's squad is quite young. I think the average age is about 23. But actually, in terms of Wembley wins, Patterson was part of the last Wembley win against Wickham. Luke O'Nien was. Trey Hume was in and around that squad. Dan Neil, Patrick Roberts as well. Dennis Serkin. So there is some Wembley experience there. Caveat to that is the likes of Joe Bellingham first time, Chris Rigg first time, Eliza Mayenda first time. I think it would be Romain Mundle's first time should he play any part at all. Wilson Isidore. So it is interesting, isn't it? That dynamic and looking at things that give us a psychological and mental boost. We've talked about the playoff games. We've talked about Wembley experience and youthfulness and all of that sort of stuff. The two games between Sunderland and Sheffield United in the Championship, do you think those are significant in the mind of Chris Wilder, particularly the one on New Year's Day? I asked that question because tactically that was the first time that Regis Lebris really sprung that 4-4-2, much to everybody's surprise at the time, and it worked very well Isidore and Mayenda getting on the score sheet. I think they assisted each other in that game
Yeah.
as well. Sunderland looked really fluid from an attacking sense. Obviously, it's very, very different at Wembley in a playoff final. Whether he'll do 4-4-2 again, I'm not entirely sure. He did it at times against Coventry over the two legs. But it's an interesting tactical battle is what I'm getting at, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I remember coming away from that game and they seemed like, you'll be able to tell me better, obviously, but they seemed like a real belief in the Sunderland fans after that game. It seemed like a really big sort of statement win almost. I mean, thinking back to the game now, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but fine margins again, big moments because United could have gone ahead with a penalty. Kiefer Moore sticks that away. At the time, United was so defensively solid. Could they sort of sat back a little bit more, soaked up the pressure, and maybe come away with a 1-0 win? From what I remember, there was a gift of a goal with a defensive mistake. Jack Robinson, puts one on a plate for, I can't remember if it was Mender or Isidore. And it's a very different game. It turns completely, doesn't it? What I would say, sound like excuses again, but it's a very different United squad from that day. I think Chris referenced it yesterday again. The bench that day, that was in the middle of a really, really tough period for United where, after 60 minutes, 70 minutes, when you're looking to change it, he'll have been turning to his bench and going, there's not a lot really here in terms of, sort of recognised championship experience. There was a lot of kids on that bench who are, they'll be good players, but they weren't good players. They weren't the right options, I should say, at the time. Whereas now his options are ridiculous. Really, we were running through the predicted team yesterday that he could put out there, and I think five different people had a different player in certain positions. There's so many options that he can call upon now. And going back to the game at Bramall Lane, I thought Sunderland were really good then. They're really impressed by them, like a young, energetic team. I think the lad Watson,
he
was really good that game on the left wing, if I remember rightly. Sort of thinking, where's he come from? Looking open and being about 14 or something, whatever it was.
Yeah, and now he's off to Brighton at the end of the season.
Yeah, and thinking he could go far. And then obviously there's news quite recently, wasn't it, that it'd been agreed to.
And of course that game at Bramall Lane as well, you talk about moments, but Sunderland missed a penalty in that game as Sheffield United did in the reverse as well. So it's interesting, that, isn't it?
Yeah, and then last minute, I think it was, or late on, Tom Davies comes up with a winner and Bramall Lane goes wild. And like I said, it could easily have been two very different outcomes. It could easily have been still one win each, just in the reverse leg, if that makes sense. So you can place as much emphasis or as little on that as you like, really. If you want to sort of see, we could have easily won two with big moments, could easily have lost two with big moments. Ultimately, like I said, I don't want to keep sounding like a broken record, but it doesn't count for much at 3:00. But I thought they were just good games. Sunderland, I've really enjoyed watching them this season. Like that young team we talked about, the sort of youthful naivety, but I mean that in the best way, in that we're just going to go at teams, and whether it's you'll know better than me, whether it's cost you at times with that approach, I don't know, but just enjoyed watching the likes of Rigg and Bellingham, or Job. Does he go Job now? Does he go Bellingham?
Yeah, he gets Job, but we tend to include Bellingham in headlines just because it drives more hits.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. Yeah. I like watching Luke O'Nien. Like he's talk about character. He just seems like I want to use a word, but I can't use it on a
Housery.
You'll know exactly the one that I'm thinking of. I quite like that. But then Ballard, United I've looked at before. I like the keeper Patterson, even though he got a bit of stick at some point this season, didn't he? I like him. Simon Moore, obviously, who we know very well in these parts, was a great guy. So it'd be nice to hopefully catch up with him on Saturday. And yeah, the front two we talked about earlier. I mean, they've got everything, haven't they? It's talk about unpredictability. It's one of those where I imagine, again from the outside, you're not quite sure what you're going to get from them most games, but when you do get when you get the best of them, I imagine it's a real handful for the defenses. And if they both play together, which I guess is the sort of tactical question that you'll all be asking up there, if he plays them together or whether he goes one or the other or whatever. But yeah, United have got some good players as well. there's always a tendency amongst supporters is there to look at the opposition team and go, oh, you know, Riggs a good player, Bellingham's a good player, Isidore, Mayenda. But then you look at United's team, and I'm sure Sunderland fans are probably doing exactly the same.
Definitely looking at United's team and thinking what an embarrassment of riches, particularly up front. The options, I think the options you have, the 4 or 5 listed on Sheffield United's side. So you've got Tom Cannon, I know he hasn't set the world alight, but then Tyrese Campbell, Ben Berrett and Diaz, the others as well. Ryan Brewster. Yeah. It's like, you know, I know Ryan Brewster's move was some time ago now, but expensive players across that front line.
Yeah, 100%. And the interesting one for me, you know, you talked about Mayenda and Isidore. The interesting one for me from United is whether Chris sticks with Kiefer Moore, who sort of came in.
Yeah, of course, I forgot about
not from the cold. I was going to say from the cold. There, he had an injury issue, and then he couldn't get his place back because Tyrese Campbell was scoring goals and did what he came in to do. But in the playoffs against Bristol City, Chris sort of noticed that, you know, there'd be perhaps a sort of aggressive press from Bristol City there, and he's not too proud, you know, to sort of go, you know what, if you're going to press us, we'll go over it. And Kiefer Moore was a real handful for the Bristol City defence. You saw the red card, which was a laughable sort of narrative about it not being a red card. I mean, he's grabbed him, dragged him all over, and then he's got a touch on the ball. So it's a nailed on red card all day long for me. But does he sort of stick with that in the final with Ballard being so dominant, you know, in the air and, you know, stuff like that? Does that play into his mind, or does he decide to go back to the single striker that, you know, he stuck with for most of the season before he changed it quite late on? It'd be really interesting. But what I will say is that the way they've handled, because I imagine a question that I've seen quite a lot is, after missing out on top 2, how are they going to sort of react to that? And is it going to, you know, is it going to play on their minds? And are they going to psychologically be damaged by that? And the reaction to missing out, I think, has been really good. You know, after that Burnley game, which is when the top 2 dream officially died. I mean, it had died a few days before when they lost 3 in a row, and it was an uphill task from there. But the way that they sort of drew a line under that and said, listen, that's us now. You know, we have to sort of reset and go again with this second chance in the playoffs. And it's easy saying that. Sometimes doing it can be difficult, can't it? We've seen that with teams before. But the way they've sort of reset physically, sort of more importantly as well mentally, has been really impressive. You know, the mood around the place is very different to previous. And I've covered too many playoff campaigns before that have ended in defeat, and this one does seem slightly different. You know, whether that will bear fruit, we'll only know on Saturday, as I keep saying. But there does seem a slightly different mood around the camp. You know, their previous playoff finals doesn't affect this group, as I said before. You know, they weren't around for that. You know, they've drawn a line under that. What they can affect, they can't affect 97, they can't affect 03 and all the other ones. They can affect 2025, and that's what they're sort of focusing on. You know, if they do, God forbid, lose on Saturday, it won't be because of what happened in 1988, and it won't be what happened against Burnley in 09. It'll be what happens on the day.
Well, so I think they've drawn a line under that. Sunderland hadn't won at Coventry in 40 years before they did in the playoffs. The record was absolutely shocking. So it just goes to show, doesn't it?
Yeah, and again, we said before, it's a theme of this podcast, I suppose. These narratives are there to be broken, aren't they? You know, you can look at that and go, oh, that doesn't mean you're going to lose again. You know, they'll probably look at that and go, no Sheffield United teams won at Wembley in 100 years. No Sheffield United team's ever been successful in the playoffs. Why not us? Why can't we be the ones to go and do that? You know, and that can be, I imagine, quite a powerful, you know, motivator for these players. Not that they'll need it, because getting to the Premier League is powerful enough, but just maybe a little psychological, you know, 1%, you know, you can add to your performance. You know, who knows? Yeah,
we'll start tailing it off, Danny, because the build up to Wembley is very, very busy for the both of us. I know you've got another podcast to do later on the Roker Report, so if you want to catch more of Danny, then head over there. Just wanted to get your thoughts quickly, Danny, on the final itself. Maybe it's a little prediction, and just generally yours and Sheffield United's travel plans as well, in terms of the fans, because Sunderland tend to go to Trafalgar Square and Covent Garden on the Friday night, and all hell tends to break loose. Is that something we'll see from Sheffield United in other areas of the city? Is anything like that being discussed? Because it's going to be quite funny, because I think that this is my 5th time at Wembley or something like that, 4th or 5th, I think. And Sheffield United will obviously be wearing red and white shirts, and so will Sunderland. So it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to seem like very, very busy. And in my head, everyone's just going to sort of like maybe merge into one, and there's no sort of there's no real beef between the two football clubs, is there? So I'm hoping for quite a nice but competitive atmosphere in the build-up.
Yeah, a red and white takeover of London. Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. Yeah, in terms of travel plans, I mean, I've seen the scenes before of teams taking over, Covent Garden and places like that before. I'm not entirely sure that will happen from a United point of view, whether that is sort of being scarred by previous attempts, or this is not to sound big time at all or anything, but sort of the previous experiences of Wembley in recent years, it's not quite sort of big fresh event. I'm not saying it's for Sunderland, but we've seen for some clubs who've not been there for a long time and they sort of make a day of it. I think for United fans, they're just more focused on actually getting there because the trains are an absolute nightmare. There's no trains between Sheffield and London, which is obviously not ideal. But yeah, it'll be, I think once they're there and they've got the box park and things like that, that'll be a big sort of event down there. And yeah, I think it'll be a good sort of occasion on the day as well. Sunderland fans obviously travel in remarkable numbers and make a lot of noise. United will have to match that. But I will say the atmosphere against Bristol City in the second leg, not just because of the result. There was like quite a touching rendition of George Baldock's song in the second leg. That's been sung all season, but it seemed at one point like they were every single United fan in the stadium on their feet singing it for what seemed like about 20 minutes non-stop, and that was quite emotional, actually, quite spine tingling. So they have made that sort of experience. They've had made the atmosphere, of late, and they'll need to do that again because I know Sunderland will do that. It's just two big clubs, isn't it? Let's be fair. I think when we sort of, I don't know if you feel the same, but when you sort of cover a club, especially it's a Sheffield mentality thing to sort of talk your city down and your team down almost. But then I think sometimes we don't shout enough about what a big football club this is. It's a home of football. Let's not forget that football was invented here. It's a big football club. Sunderland as well. They've had some really difficult times of late, but you see the crowds they've got this season. It's a huge. What's their potential? It's not even potential, is it? It's huge now, and obviously you guys will be looking, if you get back in the Premier League, to sort of make a go of it. So I think it'll be a good occasion between two teams. We'll give everything. The fans will hopefully do the same. I think it'll just be a game of football, hopefully. Like I said earlier, I think it'll be cagey. I don't think either team will sort of, explode into a 2 or 3 goal advantage at half time. Obviously, I hope Sheffield United do that for obvious reasons, but I'm not sure they will. Yeah, I just hope it'll be a competitive, good game of football. And obviously, I hope Sheffield United come out on top. But in terms of prediction, I hate making predictions. They never, ever come true. I just hope, like I say, avoid penalties because that's no way to lose. And yeah, I just hope it's a decent game of football. I'm going to sit on the fence with that one. I hope, obviously, and expect maybe he's probably a bit strong, but slightly suspect United might just edge it on the day. But I guess you'll probably have the same leanings towards your side. Yeah, I just think it'll be a good game of football, and hopefully a day to remember.
No, absolutely. Well, Danny, I wish you good health. I wish you safe travels, safe passage through London. I hope you're miserable coming out of it, just from a Sunderland perspective. But I'm sure you won't.
I get what you mean. Yeah,
I'm sure you won't begrudge me that. I'm looking forward to catching up with you at Wembley as well. Hopefully, get 5 minutes. We'll have a little catch up down there. But thanks for joining us. You can head over to the Sheffield Star for all of the latest if you want to read a little bit more from Chris Wilder and any team news. Danny Hall is all over that. And thanks once again for joining us, Danny, and thanks for Sunderland fans for tuning in.